Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and lesser-known aspects of the Viking Age, their sophisticated trade network and economy. What most people don't realize is that these extraordinary seafarers built a commercial empire that stretched from the icy shores of Greenland all the way to the golden domes of Constantinople. Picture this. Between the 8th and 11th centuries after Christ, while most of Europe was fragmented into small kingdoms, the Vikings created a vast trading network that connected 3 continents. These weren't just raiders and warriors, they were master traders who could navigate through treacherous waters and negotiate in multiple languages. What's truly remarkable is how they managed to establish trade routes in such challenging conditions. Using their legendary longships, they crossed the stormy North Atlantic to reach Greenland and Iceland, sailed down the mighty Russian rivers to trade with the Arabs, and navigated the Mediterranean to reach the wealthy Byzantine Empire. In their northern homeland, modern-day Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, the Vikings developed thriving trading centers. Places like Hedeby and Birka became the medieval equivalent of today's global trade hubs, where merchants from all corners of the known world would gather to exchange exotic goods. The Vikings' success wasn't just about their sailing skills. They had an incredible ability to adapt to different cultures and trading practices. They used silver as currency with the Arabs, furs with the Slavs, and even established their own weight and measurement systems that merchants from different regions could trust. If you're fascinated by Viking history and want to discover more about these medieval trading masters, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Medieval Archives. Join us on our historical adventures as we uncover more incredible stories from the past. The story we're about to tell is full of unexpected twists, remarkable innovations, and the incredible legacy that still influences our world today. Are you ready to embark on this fascinating journey through Viking trade history? Our journey into the Viking trading world begins with a remarkable figure. There of Hålogaland, a 9th century merchant whose detailed accounts to King Alfred the Great provide us with a fascinating window into Viking commerce. Imagine sitting in King Alfred's Great Hall in England, listening to Othere describe his adventures, sailing along the Norwegian coast and into the White Sea, trading in valuable commodities like walrus ivory and precious furs. But Othere wasn't alone in shaping this vast trading network. Arab merchants, like the famous Ibn Fadlan, traveled thousands of miles to trade with the Vikings. In his writings, Ibn Fadlan left us colorful descriptions of these tall as palm trees Norse traders, though he wasn't always complimentary about their hygiene habits. These Arab merchants brought exotic silks, spices, and silver coins that would transform the Viking economy. The unsung heroes of this story were the skilled craftsmen in Viking trading towns. These artisans created everything from intricate jewelry to powerful weapons. In places like Hedeby, you could find blacksmiths working with high-quality iron from Sweden, glassmakers creating delicate beads, and bone carvers crafting beautiful combs that were sought after throughout Europe. Local farmers and producers played a crucial role too. They weren't just growing food, they were producing valuable trade goods like wool, honey, and tar. These materials were essential for shipbuilding and textile production throughout Northern Europe. Overseeing all this activity were the Jarls, the noble class of Viking society. Think of them as medieval business moguls who controlled the trading routes and collected taxes from merchants passing through their territories. The most powerful Jarls, like Eric of Hedeby, could amass fortunes that rivaled those of kings. Each of these groups, from the adventurous merchants to the skilled craftsmen, from the hard-working farmers to the wealthy Jarls, played their part in creating one of the most dynamic trading networks of the medieval world. Together, they built an economic system that would influence European commerce for centuries to come. Isn't it fascinating how these diverse groups of people, speaking different languages and coming from different cultures, managed to create such a sophisticated trading network? And all this happened over 1,000 years ago, in an age without phones, emails, or international banking systems. While Hollywood loves to portray Vikings as mere raiders and plunderers, their real economic system was incredibly sophisticated. Forget the stereotypical horned helmets and battle axes for a moment. Let's talk about how these skilled traders built one of the medieval world's most impressive commercial networks. Imagine setting sail from a bustling port in Norway, your ship laden with furs and amber, heading out into the vast unknown. Viking merchants regularly undertook such incredible journeys, establishing trade routes that would make modern logistics companies jealous. They sailed as far east as Baghdad, south to North Africa, and west to Newfoundland, all without GPS or modern navigation tools. The Vikings developed specialized production centers that would rival today's industrial zones. Take the town of Ryby in Denmark, for instance. By the 8th century after Christ, it had become famous throughout Europe for its glass bead production. These weren't just any beads. They were so precisely made that they served as a kind of medieval quality standard. Merchants could actually use them to test silver purity by comparing the bead's weight to silver pieces. Speaking of silver, the Vikings created a fascinating monetary system. Instead of minting their own coins initially, they used a weight-based silver economy. Merchants would carry small portable scales, and pieces of silver, called hack silver, would be cut to exact weights for transactions. How's that for practical problem-solving? But perhaps their most impressive achievement was the establishment of trading centers like Hedeby and Birka. Picture Hedeby, a fortified town with a protected harbor, permanent craft workshops, and international merchants speaking a dozen different languages. It was like a medieval New York City. Archaeological finds show goods from as far away as Persia and China in these trading centers. The real genius of the Viking economic system was how it combined local production with international trade. A craftsman in Birka could trade his locally made goods for Arabic silver coins, which he could then use to buy Chinese silk brought by merchants traveling the Russian rivers. This wasn't just trade, it was globalization, Viking style. What makes this even more remarkable is that they built this entire system in an age when most of Europe was still struggling with basic local commerce. The Vikings weren't just raiders who got lucky. They were skilled entrepreneurs who created an economic network that would influence European trade for centuries to come. At the heart of Viking economy lay a fascinating concept called verdiska, their understanding of value. But what made their economic structure truly remarkable was how it seamlessly blended local production with international trade. Let me paint you a picture of daily economic life in a Viking settlement. Every morning, local farmers would bring their produce to the marketplace: fresh eggs, cheese, butter, and meat. But these weren't just ordinary farming communities. Each farm was like a small factory, producing everything from wool and textiles to tar for waterproofing ships. They were incredibly self-sufficient. The Viking trading system was surprisingly sophisticated. While many people think they just raided and plundered, the truth is they had a complex network of trade based on both barter and silver currency. Imagine walking through a Viking marketplace. In one corner, you might see a farmer trading fresh butter for iron tools, while in another, a merchant carefully weighing silver pieces on delicate scales. Speaking of silver, it played a crucial role in their economy. Vikings didn't initially mint their own coins. Instead, they used what we call hack silver. They would literally hack pieces of silver jewelry, coins, or ingots to specific weights for transactions. Every merchant carried a small portable scale, and these scales were so precise they could measure down to the weight of a few barley grains. The development of urban trading centers transformed Viking society. Take Birka, for example. This wasn't just some small trading post. It was a bustling medieval city with permanent workshops, international merchants, and even its own legal system for handling trade disputes. Archaeological finds show that these urban centers had sophisticated waste management systems and planned street layouts, quite advanced for their time. One of the most interesting aspects of Viking economic life was their innovative credit system. When silver wasn't available, they used a system called vara, standardized units of homespun woolen cloth that served as currency. Imagine paying for your groceries with lengths of fabric. Local farms were the backbone of this economy. Each farm was not just about subsistence farming, they were agricultural enterprises producing surplus goods for trade. The Vikings were master preservers too, smoking and drying fish and fermenting dairy products that could last through long sea voyages. What's particularly fascinating is how they managed to coordinate all this economic activity without modern communication systems. They developed sophisticated networks of trust, with merchants' reputations being their most valuable asset. Word traveled fast in the Viking world, and a merchant who cheated others would quickly find themselves excluded from the trading network. This wasn't just an economy. It was a complex social system that brought together local producers, international merchants, craftsmen and sailors into one intricate web of commerce. And perhaps most impressively, many of the trading routes and economic principles they established continued to influence European commerce for centuries to come. The Vikings weren't just warriors, they were entrepreneurs, craftsmen, farmers, and international traders who built one of the most dynamic economies of the medieval world, and they did it all without banks, phones, or computers. Now that's what I call impressive. Now let me tell you about 3 incredible moments that completely transformed Viking trade and changed the course of medieval history. These weren't just simple discoveries, they were economic revolutions that would reshape the medieval world. First, imagine being among the first Vikings to discover the Volga River route in the 9th century after Christ. Picture yourself sailing down this mighty river, your ship loaded with northern furs and amber, venturing into unknown territories. This wasn't just any trade route, it was a gateway to untold riches. The Volga River became the Vikings' highway to the Arab world, connecting Scandinavia with the wealthy Abbasid Caliphate. What makes this discovery even more fascinating is how it happened almost by accident. Viking traders, following the stories of riches from the east, gradually mapped out a complex network of rivers, portages, and trading posts. They had to literally carry their ships overland, between rivers at times. Talk about determination. This route brought such an influx of Arabic silver coins that archaeologists are still finding hordes of them today in Scandinavia. The second game-changer was the establishment of Dublin as a major trading hub. Now here's something most people don't know. Dublin wasn't just founded by Vikings, it was transformed by them from a small settlement into one of medieval Europe's most important commercial centres. By the year 841 after Christ, Dublin had become a vital link between Scandinavia and the wealthy kingdoms of Britain and Ireland. Dublin's success story is particularly interesting because it shows how Vikings could build lasting commercial enterprises, not just temporary raiding bases. They created a sophisticated urban centre with its own mint, craftsman's quarter, and international harbour. The city became so prosperous that its trading connections stretched from Iceland to the Mediterranean. But perhaps the most dramatic development was the creation of the Constantinople trade route, often called the road from the Vikings to the Greeks. This wasn't just another trading path, it was an engineering and diplomatic marvel. Vikings had to navigate through dangerous rapids, negotiate with various tribes, and master the treacherous waters of the Black Sea to reach the glittering city of Constantinople. Just imagine arriving in Constantinople for the first time as a Viking trader. You've traveled thousands of miles through unknown territories, and suddenly you're faced with the most magnificent city in the Christian world. The Byzantine emperors were so impressed by Viking traders and warriors that they even created an elite guard unit called the Varangian Guard, made up entirely of Vikings. These three developments didn't just happen in isolation, they created an interconnected trading network that spanned 3 continents. Viking merchants could now trade Baltic amber for Arabic silver, exchange that silver for Irish wool in Dublin, and then trade that wool for Byzantine silks in Constantinople. It was like a medieval version of global commerce. The real genius of these trade routes was how they connected different cultural and economic zones. Vikings weren't just moving goods, they were transferring ideas, technologies, and cultural practices across vast distances. They became the ultimate cultural intermediaries of the medieval world. And here's the most remarkable part. Many of these trade routes continued to be used for centuries after the Viking Age ended. The Vikings didn't just create trading routes, they established lasting connections between different parts of the medieval world that would influence European commerce well into the Middle Ages. Let me take you on a fascinating journey through the most prized treasures of Viking trade. These weren't just simple commodities. Each item tells an incredible story of adventure, craftsmanship, and the remarkable reach of Viking commerce. Let's start with the luxurious furs from the far north. Imagine being a wealthy merchant in Baghdad or Constantinople, wearing a magnificent sable fur coat brought all the way from the Arctic Circle by Viking traders. These weren't just any furs. The Vikings specialized in rare and exotic pelts like black fox, polar bear, and marten. In fact, these northern furs were so valuable that they were worth their weight in silver. The finest pelts often ended up adorning the wardrobes of caliphs and emperors. Now, let's talk about Baltic amber, the gold of the north. This beautiful fossilized tree resin was one of the Vikings' most profitable trade goods. What's fascinating is how the Vikings turned what was essentially ancient tree sap into a luxury item desired throughout the medieval world. Arab writers described it as hardened wine and believed it had magical properties. Viking traders would collect amber from the shores of the Baltic Sea and transform it into beautiful jewelry and decorative items that would fetch astronomical prices in distant markets. One of the most unique commodities in Viking trade was walrus ivory from Greenland. Here's something remarkable. When elephant ivory became scarce in Europe, walrus ivory became the go-to material for luxury items. Viking hunters would undertake dangerous expeditions into the Arctic waters to hunt these massive creatures. The tusks were then carved into everything from chess pieces to religious artifacts. In fact, some of the most beautiful medieval chess pieces ever found, the Lewis chessmen, were carved from walrus ivory by Viking craftsmen. We can't ignore the darker side of Viking trade, the thrall system, or slave trade. While it's a challenging topic, it was a significant part of their economy. Slaves, known as thralls, were often captured during raids or bought from other traders. However, what's less known is that Viking society had laws protecting thralls, and many could eventually buy their freedom and even become successful merchants themselves. Iron and weapons were another crucial part of Viking trade. The Vikings weren't just users of iron, they were master metallurgists. Swedish iron was particularly famous for its quality. Viking blacksmiths could create steel so pure that their swords became legendary throughout Europe. They even developed a technique for pattern welding steel that created beautiful designs in their blades. These weren't just weapons, they were works of art. Finally, let's look at the exotic goods from the East, silk and spices. While Vikings didn't produce these items themselves, they became expert middlemen in the luxury trade. Through their eastern trade routes, they brought Persian silks, Arab spices, and even Chinese ceramics to Western Europe. Imagine the excitement when a Viking ship arrived in a northern port, its hold filled with fragrant cinnamon, delicate silk, and exotic peppers from distant lands. What made Viking trade truly remarkable was how they connected these different luxury items. A merchant might trade northern furs for Arabic silver in the Volga markets, use that silver to buy silk in Constantinople, then trade that silk for Baltic amber, creating a complex web of luxury good exchanges that spanned thousands of miles. The Vikings understood something fundamental about luxury trade. It wasn't just about the items themselves, but about the stories and exotic origins that came with them. Every piece of amber, every fur, every silk cloth carried with it tales of distant lands and dangerous journeys that made these items even more valuable in the eyes of their customers. This sophisticated understanding of luxury goods and their markets shows us yet another side of Viking civilization. Not just warriors and raiders, but clever merchants who knew exactly how to make the most of their position at the crossroads of medieval trade routes. They were, in many ways, the first luxury goods traders of medieval Europe. Let me take you on an incredible journey through the Viking world of international relations, a story that spans 3 continents and connects cultures that, at first glance, seemed worlds apart. Let's start with the Vikings' remarkable relationship with the Byzantine Empire. Imagine sailing into Constantinople for the first time, the largest city in the Christian world, with its massive walls and the magnificent Hagia Sophia dominating the skyline. The Vikings were so impressed by Constantinople that they called it Miklagard, the great city. But here's something fascinating. The Byzantines didn't just trade with the Vikings, they trusted them enough to form an elite military unit called the Varangian Guard. Picture Norse warriors standing in their gleaming armor, protecting the Byzantine emperor himself. The trading relationship between Vikings and Byzantines was so formal that they even had written trade agreements. Vikings had to enter the city through specific gates, live in designated areas, and were only allowed to trade at certain times. They couldn't enter the city with weapons, but given how valuable they were as traders, they followed these rules. The Byzantines particularly valued Viking slaves, furs, and amber, while the Vikings coveted Byzantine silks, spices, and those famous purple-dyed fabrics reserved for royalty. Now let's travel east to the Abbasid Caliphate. The relationship between Vikings and Arabs was truly remarkable. Arab chronicles described the Vikings as tall, blonde giants who were impressively clean. Apparently, they had a reputation for weekly bathing, which was quite frequent for medieval standards. The archaeological evidence of this trade is astounding. Tens of thousands of Arab silver coins have been found in Scandinavia, some still in their original leather pouches. The Arabs were particularly interested in Viking furs, amber and honey, while the Vikings craved Arabic silver coins and exotic goods. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this relationship was the cultural exchange. Vikings adopted Arabic weighing systems and even copied Arabic coins, sometimes adding their own Norse designs to them. The Viking connection with Slavic peoples is another fascinating chapter. As they traveled down the great rivers of Eastern Europe, the Volga, the Dnieper, and the Don, Vikings didn't just trade with Slavic communities. They often integrated with them. In fact, the very name Russia comes from Rus, a term referring to Viking traders and warriors who settled among the Slavic peoples. They established important trading centers like Novgorod and Kiev, which would later become major cities. Finally, let's look at the British Isles, where Viking influence was perhaps most profound. This wasn't just about raids, it was about establishing lasting trading networks. The Vikings transformed Dublin from a small settlement into one of medieval Europe's most important trading ports. They established York, which they called Jorvik, as a major commercial centre, where archaeologists have found everything from African cowrie shells to Persian ceramics. What made Viking interactions truly unique was their ability to adapt to different cultures while maintaining their own identity. They learned Arabic to trade in Baghdad, Greek to negotiate in Constantinople, and various Slavic languages for their eastern trade routes. They were like medieval cultural chameleons. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these interactions was how they created lasting connections between different worlds. Viking traders didn't just move goods. They transferred ideas, technologies, and cultural practices across vast distances. They carried Arabic mathematical concepts to Europe, Byzantine architectural styles to Scandinavia, and Slavic artistic motifs to the British Isles. This wasn't just trade. It was globalization, Viking style. They created a network of cultural and commercial exchanges that would influence European civilization for centuries to come. Through their ships, their trading posts, and their remarkable ability to bridge different cultures, the Vikings became the ultimate connectors of the medieval world. The legacy of these interactions can still be seen today, in the place names of Britain and Ireland, in the early urban development of Eastern Europe, and in the countless archaeological treasures that continue to tell the story of these remarkable medieval traders who connected worlds that had previously seemed impossibly far apart. As we conclude our journey through Viking economics, let's explore the remarkable legacy they left behind, one that continues to influence our world even today. You might be surprised to learn just how much of our modern economic geography was shaped by these medieval traders. Think about this. Many of Europe's major cities started as Viking trading posts. Dublin, Kiev, and York weren't just temporary settlements. They were carefully chosen locations that would become crucial commercial centers. When Vikings established these trading posts, they had an uncanny ability to pick locations that would remain commercially significant for centuries. Take Dublin, for instance. From a Viking trading post to Ireland's capital city, it's been a crucial commercial center for over 1,000 years. The trading routes established by Vikings were so efficient that they continued to be used long after the Viking Age ended. The famous river road through Russia to Constantinople remained a key trading route well into the Middle Ages. In fact, many modern highways and shipping lanes follow paths first mapped out by Viking traders. These weren't just random paths. They were carefully plotted routes that took advantage of natural features and seasonal weather patterns. But perhaps their most fascinating legacy was their influence on medieval banking and currency. The Viking weight-based silver economy laid the groundwork for standardized currency systems across medieval Europe. Those small scales that Viking merchants carried became the prototype for medieval money-changing tools. Even more interesting, the term sterling in British currency might come from the Old Norse sterlinga, meaning of excellent quality. Their maritime innovations were truly revolutionary. Vikings developed sophisticated methods for navigation, including using the sun and stars, understanding wind patterns, and even using primitive forms of solar compasses. They created special tools for measuring latitude using the sun's position, techniques that would be used by European sailors for centuries to come. Their shipbuilding techniques were so advanced that some of their design principles are still used in modern boat building. The Vikings also left us with something less tangible, but equally important: a model for international trade based on trust and reputation. In a world without international laws or banking systems, Vikings created networks of trusted traders and standardized trading practices that would influence European commerce for generations. They showed that successful long-distance trade wasn't just about goods. It was about building relationships and maintaining trust. Archaeological evidence suggests that Viking trading practices influenced the development of medieval market towns across Europe. The layout of their trading posts, with designated areas for different types of commerce, became a template for medieval urban planning. You can still see this influence in the historic centers of many European cities. The Vikings also pioneered concepts we might consider surprisingly modern. They developed sophisticated credit systems, standardized weights and measures, and even created early forms of trade agreements. They understood something fundamental about commerce, that successful trade requires more than just goods and ships. It needs systems, standards, and trust. Their influence on monetary systems was particularly long-lasting. The Viking practice of using standardized silver weights as currency influenced the development of medieval European monetary systems. In fact, some historians argue that the widespread use of silver as currency in medieval Europe was partly due to Viking trading practices. As we look at our modern globalized world with its international trade routes, standardized currency systems, and maritime commerce, we can see echoes of Viking innovation everywhere. They weren't just successful traders, they were pioneers who laid the groundwork for many aspects of modern international commerce. Now, before we end our journey through Viking economic history, take a moment to reflect on how these medieval traders shaped our world. From the cities we live in to the ways we conduct international trade, their influence continues to resonate through the centuries. If you've enjoyed this exploration of Viking economic power, don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to the Medieval Archives for more fascinating historical adventures. There are so many more incredible stories from the past waiting to be discovered. Until our next historical adventure, remember, the Vikings weren't just warriors, they were the architects of medieval global trade.